Hello, everyone. Welcome to the University of Maine Cooperative Extension's Preserving the Maine Harvest webinar. I'm Lisa Fishman, and we will also be joined today by my other colleagues, Vinya Lindley and Kathy Savoy in the demo kitchen. Thanks for joining us for these webinars that are designed to correspond with what's growing in your garden and what's for sale from local farmers markets. With the growing season well underway here in Maine, we've got your answers for how to preserve these foods safely. Our webinars provide guidance according to current USDA recommendations for preserving food at home. The mission of the University of Maine Cooperative Extension is to help Maine people improve their lives through an educational process that uses research-based knowledge focused on issues and needs. Our educational programs include agriculture, horticulture, including master gardeners, 4-H youth development, food safety, food preservation, and nutrition. Today, we will focus on canning tomatoes and salsa. Some housekeeping. We have our webinar set up so that you can hear and see us, but we can't hear or see you. We will have time for questions throughout our presentation, and you can ask a question by selecting the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen and typing your question into the box. Thanks for joining us. Now let's get started.
Hi, everybody. Thanks again for joining us. Tomatoes are really one of the most popular products for home canners to preserve. From whole to stewed tomatoes to salsa and tomato sauce, tomatoes are really popular. So we're going to get started with a poll. We're wondering if you could tell us what your favorite tomato product to preserve is. So the options are salsa, tomato juice, sauce, stewed tomatoes, or whole or sliced tomatoes. So it looks like lots of folks are weighing in, and there's some contenders. We'll give you a couple more seconds to cast your vote. And awesome. So it looks like the most popular is just the really easy, simple whole or sliced tomato, followed by a few runners up, stewed, sauce, and salsa, and nobody's really into making tomato juice, so that's really interesting. Thanks, folks, for weighing in and telling us how you like to preserve tomatoes. So I'll pass it back to Lisa, who's going to talk more about tomato preservation.
Thanks, Vinya. Let's talk about a frequent question that we often get asked. Why do I need to acidify my tomatoes when home canning them? The USDA recommendation to acidify tomatoes came out in 1988, and it was based on growing concern that tomatoes were not acidic enough on their own. Tomatoes are borderline acidic, and depending on the variety, their stage of ripeness, the growing conditions, the soil, the weather, the sunlight, their acidity goes back and forth across that safe line between acidic and non-acidic, as you can see on that pH chart that you're looking at. The pH can range from 4.8 or higher, sometimes up as high as 5.01. As the pH scale is logarithmic, as is the Richter scale, that 0.2 difference above the safe cutoff line really is a lot. So all canned tomatoes require acidification. This includes tomato juice, crushed tomatoes, standard tomato sauce, and tomatoes canned either whole or halved or quartered. Here is a slide on the USDA recommendations for acidifying your tomatoes. You can see that the recommendations are for citric acid, bottled lemon juice, or vinegar. Remember that vinegar would need to be of the 5% variety. You simply need to add that amount of acidulant per jar prior to filling the jar with tomatoes, and this will safely acidify the tomato volume. Now, please note, citric acid is not the same as ascorbic acid, and you cannot use these products interchangeably. And when it comes to the lemon juice, you must use bottled lemon juice, not the fresh squeezed kind of lemon juice and not the little plastic lemon squeezy. The reason why is that bottled lemon juice has a standard identity for pH, whereas fresh squeezed lemon juice does not. So bottled lemon juice is the way to go. Notice that the amount of vinegar that you would need to add has a much higher volume than the other two acidifiers. And some people do not like the taste, the change in the taste that this brings the tomatoes. You could add sugar to offset this change in flavor if all you have is the vinegar on hand. You will notice that the USDA gives processing times for tomatoes in either a boiling water bath canner or a pressure canner. Oftentimes we get asked, do I really need to acidify my tomatoes that I pressure can? The answer is yes. You do need to acidify your tomatoes that you choose to process in the pressure canner. Why? Well, we're going to let our colleagues at the National Center for Home Food Preservation answer that. And I quote, "If a procedure from the USDA Complete Guide to Home Canning is for canning tomatoes offers either a boiling water or pressure canner options, all steps in the preparation are still required even if the pressure processing option is chosen. This includes acidification. The boiling water and pressure alternatives are equal processes with different time and temperature combinations calculated for these products. The pressure processing options in these products were not developed for tomatoes without added acid." So there you have it, end quote. And what about the salt in the recipes that you see? As you review the USDA guidelines for canning tomatoes, you'll see that salt is listed as optional. Salt does not play a role in the safety of home canned tomatoes. It's just there for flavor. So you can leave it out or add it based on your personal preferences. And let's talk about the importance of using only the most high quality tomatoes. Tomatoes that have spoiled, are overripe, diseased, or have been frost killed are not suitable for home canning. When in doubt, throw them out. All right, we're going to pop into the demo kitchen now and join Kathy as she shows us how to pack a jar of crushed tomatoes.
Hello everyone, welcome to the demo kitchen. Today we're going to talk about two different things, and we'll start off by visiting how to can crushed tomatoes. So 'tis the season for more tomatoes in your garden than you know what to do with. So why not take the opportunity to can or preserve those? Today we'll talk about canning them to have them for use later on. Crushed tomatoes are a marvelous thing to have on hand for either soups, stews, casseroles, or even your favorite chili recipe that you might enjoy in the dead of winter. So what I'd like to emphasize is the fact that the prep steps, so how you prepare your tomatoes, is the same for either processing method that you're going to choose to use, be that a boiling water bath or a pressure canner. So today we are working with 14 pounds of tomatoes, which should equal about 9 pints that we can then process. So I've got a clean work surface, I've got clean hands, and I'm ready to start getting ready for this activity. So one of the first things we're going to do is wash our produce. And so I've got all my tomatoes washed here, and then I'm going to remove the skins. And this is kind of a labor of love, but from a textural standpoint, it really does improve the quality of your product down the line. So to do that, And I'm working with some paste variety tomatoes today. I like to score the ends, simply making an X in the bottom. And then I also like to core the stem end, which you can do either before you heat them in boiling water, or you can do it after. I prefer to do it before. And then all that you need to do is dip them in boiling water for 30 to 60 seconds. And if you're working with a small batch, you might just want to use a couple and use a slotted spoon. If you're going for more of a medium-sized batch, you could always fill a colander, a wire mesh colander filled with tomatoes and dip them in the boiling water bath. Or you could also use a blanching pot that has the lid, the blanching basket, and then the base pot of boiling water. So whatever size you feel most comfortable working with. I'm going to go ahead and get a few of these tomatoes right in this vigorously boiling water. And again, it's just going to take a few 30 to 60 seconds to get those skins starting to peel off. And I can sneak a peek in here and look to see that where I've scored them, they're starting to peel back already. And then a super step to really get the skins off is to have a nice pot of cold water ready to dip those in. So as you wait the 30 to 60 seconds and have your slotted spoon ready, you can see, and I'm going to give these are pretty big ones, but it was boiling pretty hard. I'm going to pull one of these out and see how well it does. The skins have started to crack beyond where I scored it. Give it a few minutes to cool off in here. And then you can use your hands and see how easy it is. Hopefully you can see how easy it is to peel off the skins. And you love it when things happen on camera as easy as you tell people that they are to do. So indeed, the skins are coming right off of here. I'm going to take a second to pull these others out and get them in the cold water. So again, this is a super easy step to skinning your tomatoes. And depending on how quickly I want to work in my kitchen, sometimes I do just work with a slotted spoon. Sometimes I do have the full mesh basket that I'm working with. So again, it's 14 pounds of tomatoes that you're working with. So once you have the tomatoes with the skins removed, it's a matter of quartering these beautiful tomatoes and then putting 1/6 of the volume into a stock pot usually that has a nice base so that you don't scorch your tomatoes. So you're just going to quarter these and then get them into a nice stock pot, and you're going to heat them up and you're going to start to mash this smaller volume. And as the heat applies and the juices exude, you start to have a base, somewhat saucy, that you can work with to add the remaining volume of tomatoes. So again, we're just simply crushing those tomatoes and then adding the remaining volume to get everybody in there. Once you've got that first small amount mashed, then add the remaining volume. And all that you need to do is bring that to a boil for 5 minutes. And I've got a pot over here that I have been working with. And so again, this is a hot packed item. And you can see here that they've created a nice crushed mass that we will then go ahead and pack into the jars. And I want to take a step and talk about that important step of acidifying our jars of tomatoes. So let's move this part out of our way. and start to talk about the importance of acidifying. So as we discussed, it is per jar that you would acidify. And so I'm working again in pint jars. And all that you need to do is, once you have your jars washed, keep them warm. You've got a warm product that you're going to pack into them. And you can choose to acidify tomatoes with either a bottled lemon juice product, a powdered citric acid product, or vinegar. And those volumes were shared earlier. As mentioned, the vinegar really does give an off taste. It tastes a lot like vinegar. You can choose to alter that by adding some sugar. My personal preference is to use a bottled lemon juice product. So per pint, I'm going to be adding a tablespoon of bottled lemon juice. And so you just go ahead and add that right in. And then, as we've discussed before, the importance of working quickly to keep your product hot and to get your jars into whichever you're choosing to process, the boiling water bath or the pressure canner, as quickly as possible. So I've got, and I'm gonna scoop this out of the way. I've got 2 jars here that I'm gonna show you how I fill. And I like to get my product as close as possible so that I'm cutting down on my mess. So I'm using a jar filler to fill the jars with my crushed cooked tomatoes. And again, that lemon juice is going to mix up nicely in our tomatoes. And I chose not to add salt to this product. I like to keep it simple and add the salt depending on which type of recipe I'm using it in later on. But this jar is now ready for me to remove any trapped air bubbles by running the bubble freer around the inside of the jar, pushing things down, keeping it under the liquid, and then checking to see if I have a 1/2 inch of headspace. And if you can squint closely at your screen, you can see that I do not. So I need to add a bit more. And make my way to that 1/2 inch headspace. These headspace tools are great to work with. Each of these stepwise increments is 1/4 inch. So I simply rested on the second one to see that I am now safely at a 1/2 inch. And then I'm going to go ahead and wipe the rim of the jar. We wouldn't want to have a seed or anything get caught in there that would prevent us from having a vacuum seal form. So then I've got my 2-piece lid ready to apply. I've got the dome lid, which I've checked to make sure the sealing compound is all looking good. And this has never been used before. And then I've got a screw band that I'm going to apply to the jar. And it's going to be applied until what's called fingertip tight. So it's as tight as I can make it with just my fingertips. I don't put the whole palm of my hand on there and then crank down on it as hard as I can. That could actually cause the jar to buckle and we would not have a vacuum seal that would form. So what we have now is a jar, one of the 9 that we're hoping for, that is ready to be processed. So again, it's the same steps that we went through, regardless of if you're processing in a boiling water bath or a pressure canner. So what I want to jump ahead now and do is talk a little bit about how you would process in either of those methods. So if we were choosing to process in our boiling water bath, we would have our boiling water bath filled with water to have at least 1 inch of water above our jar tops. And this is our boiling water bath that we use a lot here in the demo kitchen. And it has a nice rack in the bottom that will help to keep the hot water circulating around the jars. And then it simply has a lid. and it is deep enough to be able to allow for that 1 to 2 inches of boiling water to be over the tops of the jars. So if we were processing in a boiling water bath, we would put the jars in here. The water would be warmed already, 180 degrees for a hot packed product. And we would start our processing time once the water came to a boil, and we would process these tomatoes for 35 minutes. Once the processing time is up, we would turn off the heat, take off the lid, and let the jars set for 5 minutes in the boiling water bath before we took them out and put them on our rack to cool. So that's the basic process for a boiling water bath. I now want to bring on our pressure canner and talk a little bit about what those steps would be if you chose to process your tomato products in a pressure canner. So this is a smaller pressure canner, and it does have the weighted gauge. So I encourage everyone who either has a pressure canner or is looking to find one for this year's canning season to remember to keep your manual close at hand. There's always lots of important information in your manual, including how much water you should put in the base of your pressure canner for processing, and also important information on how to reorder parts and pieces should you need to do that. So again, this is a weighted gauge pressure canner. It has the weight, and you simply, we will be processing these at 5 pounds of pressure, which 5 pounds of pressure is simply this knob without these 2 added rings. So pressure canner, you'd put a small amount of water in the bottom. Pressure canning relies on steam. You would start to heat this up on the stovetop, and then your jars, filled and acidified, would be put in here. And then you would put your lid on, and you would lock your lid in place. So this unit shows us a V, which we match up, and then we lock it in place. So this can take a little bit of muscle to get in place, but then we know that it is in fact locked. And it would be on our stovetop. And the first step is to vent the pressure canner. So without the gauge on it, you simply have temperature up as high as possible, and you're waiting for a billow of steam to come out through this vent hole for 10 minutes. Once that's happened, you apply the weight and then wait for the pressure to build up in your pressure canner. And how do you know when pressure has built up? Well, this knob here starts to jiggle. Knock is another term that people use for that. And with this style pressure canner, once it has a consistent knocking sound is when you start your processing time. So processing in a pressure canner for pints is a 20-minute processing time at 5 pounds of pressure. If you had a dial gauge, it would be 20 minutes at 6 pounds of pressure. So we've got a lot of information that we've shared, and I've got a slide that's going to pop up right now and show you the processing times for crushed tomatoes. And then we're going to look to field your questions now that we've given you so much information.
Super. Thank you, Kathy, for all that great information. So we have some really good questions coming through Q&A box. I'll start with some, since we're talking about pressure canning. I will start with the questions in here about pressure canning. So there's a question about the size of tomatoes when cutting the tomatoes, whether it is okay to dice those when pressure canning them. And I'm wondering if Lisa is with us still to help answer these questions. So I believe that the size is going to be determined by your recipe. So as long as you're using a recipe that says that you can either dice or crush or quarter. As long as you're going with a recipe that has that as a recommendation, then dicing would be fine. The next question is about where the water comes up to on the jar in the pressure canner. So just going back to what Kathy said, each pressure canner is going to be a little bit different in terms of how much water goes into them, but generally it does not cover the jar. That would not be, usually it's just a little bit of water that's creating a steam. So they would certainly not, I would not say that the water would cover the jar. Kate, are you going to hop in to help to assist with questions?
I'd love to. Yeah, I think we lost Lisa, so I'm here to help too.
Okay. Would you agree on that dicing? Is there any information you would add to the question on dicing?
Yeah, I would say it does depend on your recipe. So if your recipe specifies that you should cut your vegetables into a certain size, you do need to follow that because the size of the vegetable pieces affects the heat penetration, and that is very important to the safety of your final product, ensuring that every little piece in there was heated thoroughly. So you do want to follow any instructions. So if it says cut it into a 1 inch piece, you want to stick with that.
Super. Thanks, Kate. Thanks for making a surprise debut on our webinar. All right, we have another question about tomato varieties. So someone is wondering about which type of tomatoes might be best for crushed or whole tomato canning.
I tend to favor the ones that are a saucing variety. So like San Marzano, Roma, just because they have less water in them, and then so their flesh is thicker and more hardy, and so it will hold up. If you do like a slicing tomato, you'll notice in the jar that they just kind of get, they're a little more sensitive to the heating, and so they look kind of sad. I mean, they'll still be edible and nice, but if you want a more visually attractive product, maybe use the saucing varieties.
Great. Thanks, Kate. And she went on to ask specifically about beefsteak tomatoes, which are a slicing tomato. I think they tend to be a slicing tomato that's a little bit more hardy, on the more hardy end, but I do agree with Kate that a paste tomato is what I opt for when doing whole or crushed tomatoes. And then we also have a question about whether leaving the skins on is advisable, specifically to if you're making a recipe that's going to be pureed like a sauce.
That one's tough because peeling the tomatoes is so arduous that it is super tempting to skip it. And so for a while I thought it was just because of a textural issue, and I was like, I can live with the textural issue if it allows me to not have to peel my tomatoes. But it does actually help reduce the microbial load. So of course, obviously the outside of the tomato is the part that's exposed to the environment. So by dipping it in boiling water, removing the skins completely, you are actually helping to reduce the germs that end up in the canning jar. So it is a step for safety, not just quality. So you do have to commit to that step of peeling them. So one of my favorite tricks is to freeze your tomatoes this time of year, and then they peel so much easier. We showed you in the freezing tomatoes webinar last week just how easily those skins peel off. So you can run them under water, peel the skins off while they're still frozen, and then put the frozen tomatoes in a pot, cook them down, puree them with a stick blender, and then add the acidification in the jars and just ladle the tomatoes in over top. And that might be a little bit more streamlined. And then you could work on that project in like October or November when it's not hot in your kitchen.
Awesome. Thanks, Kate. So many great questions coming in today. We have a request from someone to go back to the slide on acidification. Kate, I'm wondering if it's possible for you to hop back to that one. Thank you. And again, just a reminder that all of these will come to you. All the information like this will be shared with you after the webinar today.
One more slide, Kate. That's the processing time.
Oh.
And then, oh no, there you go. Thanks.
Good catch, Kathy. Thank you. Okay. Then we have another question. Somebody asks about a steam canner. They bought a steam canner recently and are wondering about that process, which is a topic that I think was covered. Was that last week, Kate?
It was a few weeks ago, and I'm happy to field that question because it does, when we're talking about tomato processing, we do get into the no zone based on the processing times for some of our tomato products. So if you tuned into our atmospheric steam canning webinar, you heard us talk about do not process foods for more than 45 minutes in the atmospheric steam canner. So there are some tomato products, and what I'm thinking of are tomatoes packed with their own juice that have a much higher processing time in a boiling water bath than would be advisable for an atmospheric steam canner. And even the crushed tomatoes that we talked about today have a 35-minute processing time. And so the concern with a steam canner is that you've got a small amount of water, and that's 2.5 quarts in that base that's generating the steam. And that could actually boil away in a long processing time. So the answer to the question is, take a look in your USDA Complete Guide to Home Canning book, and if the boiling water bath processing time for a tomato product is less than 45 minutes, you can safely process it in your atmospheric steam canner.
Awesome, thanks, Kathy. All right. So someone else asks about why is it important to take the screw band when you're done canning and your jars have sat for the required amount of time? When you're going to store the jars, why would you want to remove the metal ring?
So the screw.
I can answer that question.
Great, go for it.
I'm sorry, I got bumped off because of a lightning strike and couldn't do anything about it. I had no power. It's important to take the screw bands off of your jars. You don't have to, but it is recommended because once those jars have cooled and are safely sealed, if you store your jars in any place that's damp or has any kind of moisture, the likelihood that those screw bands are going to form some rust underneath them is really high. If you did, for some reason, have some kind of stickiness on your screw bands, you cleaned your jars off, but you missed a spot and it was a little bit sticky and you didn't know it, and you put that screw band back on for storage, that's going to become almost frozen into place on that jar. So we want to make sure that you can remove those. It's really not necessary. A lot of people have second guessing thoughts about storing jars without those screw bands because it just looks strange and it feels strange. The lids are sealed, they're in place. The screw band has done its job of holding that lid into its place until that seals. And so as long as you've got a seal, the screw band is just extra and does not need to be in place.
Thanks, Lisa. All right, I think we'll take maybe one more question and then move on, and we'll hope to come back. There's lots of good questions today. Someone else is wondering about whether you can can any type of tomato.
Sure, you can can any type of tomato, even those little pesky cherry tomatoes. You just have to get a whole lot more skin off, and that's just a little bit more tedious and more work. But they do have terrific flavor. You can can the paste tomatoes, the the Roma type of tomatoes. You can can the slicing tomatoes and anything, you know, that you, doesn't matter what color they are. They can be the black ones, the purple ones, the red ones, the orange ones, the yellow ones. They're all good.
Super. Thanks, Lisa. All right. I think we'll go back to you, Lisa, for to tell us more about salsa.
Okay. I'm finding my spot.
And that's perfectly fine. We'll, what you can see now is the slide that shows some research that was conducted here at the University of Maine that found that, and not a huge surprise, but those salsa recipes that we find online are not safely acidified based on the research that was conducted. And there's also a whole lot of canning principles that are missed in those online recipes. So again, we want to get this information out to you to emphasize the importance of following a tested and research-based recipe. So I'm back in the demo kitchen, and I'm going to talk a bit about some of the important ingredients and basic do's and don'ts when canning salsa at home. And this, in fact, is one of my favorite things to preserve at home, and my family does love the annual salsa that we have. So we're getting ready to can some for this year, and I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the questions that came up actually, but as we go through talking about some of the important ingredients of salsa. So the first one I'd like to talk about is acids. So salsa is a mixture of foods from the low acid side of the pH scale and also the acidic side of the pH scale. So you have to be careful because it is a mixture. Salsa recipes will have acid added to them. Some will use bottled lemon juice. Some will actually use vinegar. It is bottled lemon juice, not fresh squeezed lemon juice, again, because bottled lemon juice has a standard pH. So it's a known entity and can be included in the recipe formula to know if it's safely acidified. You can substitute bottled lime juice for bottled lemon juice. And if your recipe called for vinegar, you could substitute either bottled lemon juice or bottled lime juice for the volume of vinegar that's being used. Vinegar is simply not as acidic as the lemon juice or the lime juice. So you cannot, again, you cannot substitute vinegar for the volume of lemon or lime juice. And frankly, my taste buds, when I get vinegar in a salsa, for me, it reminds me of a relish, not a traditional or authentic salsa type of condiment that we are used to. So the question also came up in our Q&A about types of tomatoes. And what I've got here for you, and I want you to see, is this is a Roma style tomato. This is actually an Amish paste. And it is that thicker, meatier, more fleshy style tomato. And as I slice it, you can actually see how little liquid and seeds are in this type of a tomato compared to a slicing variety of a tomato. And I believe this is an early girl. So I'll show you the difference. Oh, so let's see if I can get more into those. So you can see, this one's maybe not the best example, but there are more seed pockets and more juice pockets in this type of a tomato compared to the Roma or the paste variety. So again, we want a thicker salsa, we want a thicker tomato sauce. The paste variety tomatoes are the better ones to use. Again, we do encourage you to peel them for more than just the textural thing. You can also see that there are some of these tomatoes that, if you look closely, have quite a bit of blemish on them. This is a really good example. And we wouldn't want that skin to go into our product. So like Kate said, another reason for why we get those skins off. So that's the information I wanted to share on tomatoes. Another classic ingredient in your salsa recipe are your peppers. Some like it hot, some like it mild. So The truth about the salsa recipe is that you can alter it based on your personal preference. My family likes a very hot salsa. So what I do and what is safe to do is to follow the volume of peppers that are included in your recipe. So this recipe that I'm following has 2¼ cups of peppers. And so at the farmer's market this morning, there were very few options available. So I ended up buying a whole lot of jalapenos, which are a hot variety, and then some poblanos, which are not a hot variety. And I combined those two. I actually have a whole cup of these jalapeno peppers that are in my 2¼ cup volume of peppers. So again, you can play with the pepper varieties, just don't alter the volume. To peel or not to peel, the choice is yours. I dice mine up super fine and I do not have a problem with the skins. Let's talk briefly about onions. Onions, again, do not adjust the volume, but you can adjust the type of onion that's in there. So it could be white, could be yellow, could be red. Be aware of the big onion recall that's going on nationally that has, last I knew, over 500 people sick from salmonella. We'll include some information about that food recall in the follow-up resources. But important to know that there is a issue happening right now with onions. Spices. Talk briefly about spices in salsa. It is okay for you to alter the spices or leave them out based on your personal taste preference. Cumin, chili powder, oregano, cilantro, chipotle powder. These are some of the classic spices for home canned salsa, traditional salsa, restaurant salsas. You can adjust based on your flavor preference. Some people like cilantro, some people don't. The recommendation is actually, if you do like it, to add it once you're ready to serve it. That's the way you'll get the most fresh cilantro flavor imparted in your salsa. If you process it, you really lose that flavor. So I want to, those were the ingredients that I wanted to talk about. And what I have done ahead of time is prepare my recipe of salsa. And I have everything chopped, sliced, and ready to go into this large sauce pot. So you can see in here that I have my tomatoes, which have been peeled. I have my onions, which have been chopped. I have my volume of peppers, which I have chopped. And rest assured, I wore gloves when I chopped them, so I'm not going to burn my skin. And then I have the lemon juice that's in here. And it's going to cook on the stovetop. And this cooks for a short period of time. And then we add the spices to it. And then we continue to cook it further for a total of a ½ hour. And then once it's cooked down, we're going to go ahead and pack our jars and process that in a boiling water bath for 15 minutes. So it's a great thing to have on hand. Salsa is now out selling ketchup as America's favorite condiment. So this is a good thing to have on hand in your pantry for the long winter. I'm looking at the time and realizing we've got to push ahead and see if there's any other questions in the box. Back to you, Binya or Lisa.
Awesome, thanks, Kathy. We have a good question going back to a couple weeks ago. We did corn, freezing tomatoes and corn, and we have a question from someone wondering if they can go on to can the tomatoes that they have frozen. So I'll pass that to you, Lise.
Sure. Yes, you can. But remember that when you freeze your tomatoes, you are changing the structure. You're going to get much more of a mushy product after the freezing process happens. So when you go ahead and can those, the flavor is still going to be terrific, but you only want to use those frozen tomatoes in a canned product where you're looking for a mushy kind of texture. But yes, go right ahead and use those frozen tomatoes in any canned product like the salsa that Kathy was talking about.
All right, thank you. So the other question that I see here is about whether a rack is required for both methods. I think this person's referring to both a water bath and pressure canning methods.
Yes, a rack is required regardless of the method you use, even if you use the atmospheric steam canner or the boiling water bath canner or the pressure canner. You want to keep those jars off the base of the floor of the canner so that you get even heating all around and good circulation. You don't want to break jars, so indeed you do want to use a canner in all canning circumstances.
Awesome. Thank you, Lisa. I think that's all the questions we have time for today. We will get back to folks who have questions remaining in the chat box. And you will also get a list of the recommended resources that we discussed today. You can see those on the slide there in a follow-up email. And we will also want to point you to the Maine Farm and Seafood product directory for you to locate all those delicious locally grown tomatoes if you're looking for some. And we also want to encourage you, if you're interested, to sign up for a preserving coach. This is an opportunity for Maine residents to be paired with a trained master food preserver volunteer for preserving advice throughout the growing season. If you're interested in that, you can reach out to Kate. Her email is at the bottom of the slide there. We'll be back next Tuesday, again at 2 p.m. to discuss canning relish. Other topics for September include, can you believe it's already September, preserving apples, pressure canning soups and stocks, and fermenting vegetables. We'll share an email with upcoming registrations, resources, and recipes from today's topics, and information on how to be paired with a preserving coach. We'll also share a link to an evaluation and a certificate of completion. If you complete our evaluation and provide your US mailing address, we'll send you one of those handy free Headspace tools that Kathy used today in canning those tomatoes. I think we're at time. Thanks, everybody.